from where you've come to understand where you're going. So if you'll permit me just for a moment, I'd like to just take you very rapidly through the history of conservation. And India, America, Africa, all of us, very much in the same bracket, in the industrial age, post the agricultural age, and on the back of development and industry, most of the indigenous landscapes were traded for agriculture. And so across the world, free range for indigenous wildlife diminished everywhere you look. America is the great example of the bison migrations. In southern Africa, in my own country, in the name of development, free range for wildlife diminished. And if you look at any conservation project today, you can cut right through it. Any animal that is endangered, it's simply endangered because it doesn't have any space. So if we look at the history in our own country, in fact, New Zealand was the first, 1896, America, South Africa, 1926, when governments realized that you would have to set land aside for wildlife, otherwise there'd be none left. And so what happened, and in fact I stand to correction, but I think India was Corbett 36, 1936. What happened was the first step in conservation was a military approach. Colonel Stevenson Hamilton was the first warden of the Kruger National Park. Colonel Vincent was the first warden of another park. And it was a military approach. Stabilize the land, keep people out, and make the place safe for animals. And it was a very, very laudable and successful effort when done, and including in India. Many parks, Ranthambore and others, were kept safe by a military approach. Over the years, that military approach gave way to the domain of the scientist, and conservation became the place of the scientist. And I speak now, I can't speak for India, but I can speak for Africa. Science became the order of the day, and science brought us tremendous information about how these ecosystems work, how intelligent nature is, and how remarkable these animals are. And steadily in the 1970s, 1980s, when Londolozi began, that gave way for the first time to for-profit conservation development. And for-profit was unheard of in the 70s. And that model evolved: for-profit conservation development, for-profit and people conservation development. And that is where we're moving, and we now find ourselves in this modern era where the age of the enterprise development is being born. Social enterprises. And at the same time, if you look at the world, and I'll come back to social enterprises, if you look at the world on the back of 200 years of the industrial age and on this emerging information age, literally hundreds and hundreds of billionaires have come onto the landscape. They say that $41 trillion is controlled by 100 million people on planet Earth. In fact, they call them the 1%ers. So there's a new possibility, Minister, that is emerging. These people who hold this capital wish to become contributors to this planet of ours. If you look at the trends, Bill Gates and all the big names, they're all giving their money away. If you look in Africa, these high net worth individuals have come to Africa to contribute. We call it patient capital or social enterprises. And I can quote you a number of family dynasties which have come to Africa and have made enormous contributions establishing and stabilizing wildlife areas. And the way they do it is they partner with government. So the new equation, and I was interested that you mentioned national parks. I actually think national parks are in the equation. Everyone is too precious. The new equation, in my view, is the partnership between private sector, government, and community. And when I say private sector, I'm even more specific. It's high net worth people with influence and possibly citizens of India who partner with the government to create economic models which create opportunity for communities, which bring revenues to the department so that you can keep these landscapes safe, and which continue to keep safe haven for the wild animals. In Africa, the examples you gave mostly are partnership, private sector, public sector, community, but government is the main player. They need to open the doors, they have the land, open the doors, create the legislation, And the private sector actually aren't the bad guys. Properly structured, the private sector form partnership. And we are now talking in South Africa about the economy of wildlife and how it is aligned to the national agenda. Jobs, social enterprise, enterprise development is where we start our conversation about conservation. And that's what I think you have the opportunity in your province to do. Thank you.